Our next speakers are Doctors Anthony Davies and James Harrigan. Dr. Anthony Davies is an associate professor of economics at Duquesne University, a Milton Friedman Distinguished Fellow at the Foundation for Economic Education, and a co-host of the podcast Words and Numbers. Dr. Davies authors regular columns on economics and public policy for the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Pittsburgh Tribune Review. He has written a book on understanding statistics and has co-authored hundreds of op-eds for, among others, The Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, and The Washington Post. His YouTube videos on economics, government, and policy have garnered millions of views. In addition to his academic work, Dr. Davies was associate producer at the Moving Pictures Institute, chief financial officer at Parabon Computation, founded several technology companies, and is co-founder and chief academic officer at Freedom Trust, where he lectures on economics for high school students across the country. Dr. Davies is also co-host of the podcast Words and Numbers alongside Dr. James Harrigan. Words and Numbers takes a nonpartisan view of current events through the eyes of economics and political science. Dr. Harrigan is senior editor at the American Institute of Economic Research and an F.A. Hayek Distinguished Fellow at the Foundation for Economic Education. Dr. Harrigan was previously dean of the American University of Iraq Suleimani and later served as director of academic programs at the Institute for Humane Studies and Strata, where he was also senior research fellow. He co-authored Cooperation and Coercion and has written hundreds of op-eds appearing in the national media and co-host of the podcast Words and Numbers. Please join me in welcoming Doctors Anthony Davies and James Harrigan.
Thank you all for being here. I'm Anthony, he's James. We have this podcast, Words and Numbers, that we kind of started just on a lark because my kids said podcasting is the thing to do. And I said...
But wait, they've also recently said TikTok is the thing to do, so careful.
And as with Words and Numbers, I'm having to convince James that TikTok is indeed a good idea. But we started into this with the intent of just doing a few episodes and talking about life as we see it as an economist and political scientist. And the thing kind of took on a life of its own. We now have, we're coming up on our 300th episode. We come out religiously every single Wednesday. And we've talked about all sorts of things, ranging from economics to social things to current events.
And this will be the first time we ever really have the pleasure of talking about Reagan, one of my heroes, maybe one of yours as well. And that's odd, right? I'm an academic who will cheerfully admit that I think Ronald Reagan was a fantastic president and probably even a more fantastic human being. That has not made me a lot of friends in the academy, as you might imagine, but here we are.
So we want to talk about Ronald Reagan today. James and I were talking about what are we going to talk about for this thing, and said, well, we're here in Santa Barbara at the Reagan Ranch Center, and we should naturally talk about Reagan. And so James is going to take more of the political view. I'm taking more of the economic view. But in preparing, and Reagan was always a hero of mine as well, principally because of his economic policies, which were remarkably free market, given what you understand about our history from the 1900s forward in this country. But in doing some research for this talk today, I encountered stuff I didn't know that was just astounding to me. I'll throw out one thing of interest. Of course, you know that Reagan, in his, I guess, both elections, his first term and his second, took the country by landslide. I can recall, I was in college at the time, looking at this map of the United States as each state was being called for Reagan, or who is he running against the first time?
Why would you ask me that?
Yeah, but every state's going to Reagan. Every single one, I think with the exception of Minnesota and Washington, D.C., went to Reagan. And, being a kid in college, what did I know? It's an election, fine. But in retrospect, particularly thinking about how we do our politics now in this country, it's become so incredibly divisive. The left doesn't like the right, and the right doesn't like the left as voters, and it goes all the way up to the politicians, where the politicians will consider themselves to be whoever wins, the president of this particular half of the country that voted for them, and to heck with the other half. But to see that electoral map go almost entirely for one person was astounding. It was a sign of unity that the country hasn't seen since then. And in fact, and this comes to this research I was doing, it was unprecedented up until that time. If you look at the electoral vote in this country, going all the way back to our founding, only one president earned a greater percentage of the electoral vote than did Ronald Reagan, and that was George Washington.
Who became president with 100% of the electoral vote.
100% of the electoral vote. Ronald Reagan came in averaging his 2 terms, 94%, which is interesting because if you ask people, who is the most unifying president in those terms, a lot of people would probably say something like FDR. And FDR was unifying in that sense, which James will probably talk about later. We're living with much of the legacy of that unification. But even so, he averaged 88% of the electoral vote versus Ronald Reagan's 94. So in terms of unity, Reagan really represented a watershed moment in American politics. And in a lot of ways, the country at the time was very similar to what it is now, at least economically. When Ronald Reagan took office, inflation was at unprecedented levels. It was 10% when he took office. That was the highest it had ever been, save for the Great Depression. But under normal conditions, that's the highest it had ever been. Right now, when Joe Biden took office, not when he took office, but now we're dealing with inflation of above 8%, which is unprecedented, save for when Ronald Reagan took office, and that's save for the Great Depression. So we have that. Unemployment is remarkably high, along with the inflation. There's a conflict with Russia going on, which has also marked Reagan's time in office. And in so many ways, what we're dealing with today economically mirrors what Americans were dealing with when Ronald Reagan took office. And yet, we, politically, psychologically, are markedly different. We're divisive almost to the extent that we were unified back then. If you ask Americans, as Gallup does every year for going back pretty much as long as Gallup has existed, they'll ask Americans, a random selection of them, tell us, what do you think about the country? Do you think it's going in the right direction or is it going in the wrong direction? And of course, as you imagine, the numbers vary. If you're interested, the average number, this is since 1979, the average number of Americans who say, yes, the country's going in the right direction, 34%. That's astounding. From 1979 to the present, 2/3 of us routinely think the country's going in the wrong direction. When Ronald Reagan took office, that number was 17%. 17% of Americans said, yeah, we're going in the right direction. By his second term, he got that number up to just shy of 70%. Within 2 years, 3 tops, we went from a country in which virtually all of us thought we were heading the wrong direction to a country in which virtually all of us thought we were heading in the right direction. And that almost 70% approval rating, if you want to think of it like that, was only matched one other time in modern times, and that was when Bill Clinton was president during the dot-com boom. Just slightly more, 71% of Americans said we're moving in the right direction. Any idea what percentage think today we're moving in the right direction? Reagan took office, the number was 17%. Today, it's 11%.
And, look, if there's a stronger indictment against the Biden administration, I don't know what it is. We're sitting here looking at a situation in which we have a sitting president of the United States who is theoretically dealing with a number of big picture problems that we've got right now, and yet none of us can say what he's doing. Right? None of us actually know, which leads me to believe we're not doing anything at all, which under certain circumstances is usually what I suggest, right? But don't just do something, stand there.
Right.
And yet that's not the right answer right this second, that we have the kinds of problems now that are going to have to be addressed, and the political class has decided not to address them at all. And Ant and I made a bit of a sport of this during the last batch of debates, right, when we asked ourselves, okay, how many times do you think all of these people are going to use the words deficit and debt? And the correct answer, you already know it, 0 times.
And that's in all of the presidential debates from the last election. The primaries, the actual debates between the Democrat and Republican, nobody, not once, used those words def or deficit, and that includes the moderator who's asking the questions.
That's right. You would think that at least somebody might have by accident said the words.
Yeah, right.
And yet they did not. And it makes me think back to a time, and this is what I want to share with all of you about the Reagan years. I was young when he took office. I was 13. And yet it was still very obvious that we were looking at somebody who really mattered, right? Everybody kind of knew. And it was strange because everybody in the press would tell us that this doddering old man had become president and he's a fool and he's going to get us into World War III. And he kept us from getting into World War III. He knew exactly how to deal with the Russians in the Cold War. Exactly how. And he knew how to unite the people behind him, right? All you ever heard prior to that first election was that, oh, it's pretty sure, it's Carter, by the way, but Carter should run right over him and everything should be fine. And that didn't happen. And then we heard on the news what a bunch of fools we were for electing him into this powerful office. And then 4 years later, the press doubled down on all that same language, and we elected him again by an even wider margin.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how much people loved him and how much they should have. Right? This was, I think, a love affair that America had for 8 years, and it changed everything. And you start to look back now on the presidents that have been elected in your lifetimes, and they are singularly unimpressive. These are not the people that you look at and say, that's our guy. Matter of fact, I wouldn't want any of them living next door to me, let alone being president of the United States. And yet, for whatever the reason, people just can't look back on the Reagan years and with any great regularity say, we had the right answers then. And yet we did. So it's a little confusing how we refuse to learn this lesson.
James and I say frequently that it really doesn't matter who wins the presidency. And what we mean by that is you hear these things about, people were putting stickers for a while on gas pumps when the price of gas was going so high. There's a little sticker of Joe Biden pointing, saying, I did this. To which we say, no, he didn't, right?
Well, he didn't help.
He didn't help, but presidents don't have that kind of power to be influencing directly like that prices of gas or the unemployment rate or even things like the deficit and the debt. Those things, while the president signs the budget and even drafts the budget, so much of that is under the power of Congress that when you really look at it and you ask, what can a president really actually do as an individual? The answer is pretty much nothing. And yet, here we are, sitting here saying about what an interesting and wonderful president Reagan was. He did something. I claim what he did that was so wonderful had nothing to do with his presidential powers. It had to do with a psychology that when he was elected, he said to the American people, first off, all of us are one family. We aren't my side and the other side who we defeated. We're all one family, and furthermore, the key to making America better is to let the people do what they do best. They save, they invest, they make consumption choices, they create businesses, and the best thing that government can do is get out of their way and let them do the thing. One of our favorite quotes of Ronald Reagan was, he said, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And this is a politician who's saying this. He understood that the key to a vibrant economy, the key to a healthy society is let the people do their thing. That's not to say that government has no role, but government's role is very specific. It's in setting the rules of the game, enforcing the rules of the game, and leaving the players, that's us, to play the game. And what has changed between then and now is we've now had, good Lord, half a century or so of politicians who thought the reverse. The key to a vibrant society, the key to a healthy economy is the right policies. Elect me and I'll give you the right policies. And furthermore, another problem is half of you voters over there, you don't know what's good for us. Those people over there do. So that's who I'm going to be paying attention to you. The rest of you need to sit down and be quiet. And we alternate that every 4 to 8 years. But what Reagan did is he changed the psyche of the people. We all kind of woke up, and back then, and I was a kid at the time, but during the oil crisis, and we had gas lines, we had to wait in line for gas for hours to buy gasoline in this country, and so gas prices were high, and unemployment and recession, all of this stuff. Similar, not dissimilar to what we have now. But in light of all that, along comes Reagan and says, look, the key to this is all of you need to do what you do best. Government has to step out of the way. And he said one thing further. He used the phrase morning in America. He said it's morning in America. Things are going to get better. And that affected people's psychologies when they realized that we control our futures and we can make this place better. All that has to happen is government has to step out of the way. And so what happened? That had an effect. All of a sudden, people became more comfortable with the future. And when people become comfortable with the future, several things happen. They start to plan. Because if I'm comfortable that I know what the world's going to look like 5, 10 years down the road, I'm more apt to make plans about what's going to happen in my life around me 5, 10 years down the road. I'm more able to plan for the future. And one of the things that happens when I plan for the future is I become more likely to invest in the future. Maybe I start a business, maybe I invest in education, maybe I make some big ticket purchases, I buy a house, or I decide to have children, or I start to save for retirement. All of these things, Americans start to invest, more than just invest physically, we start to plan about our futures. And that created an economic juggernaut whose effects were felt all the way through the dot-com era of the 1990s and the boom in the 2000s that came off of that. All of that was the echo of what Reagan did for us as an individual. He told us to believe in ourselves, and we took him seriously. And that made a huge difference.
If anything, I think you're underselling it, right? In the tail end of the Carter years, those last 2 years of the Carter presidency, we were seeing things that Americans had never seen before, right? We were routinely insulted on the world stage, right? The Iranians had taken a number of our citizens hostage, and every night on the news they would put that placard up, how many days it was. And it was 444 days.
Yeah.
For well over a year, our people were held by the Iranians and we did nothing. We could have done all kinds of things, and we just didn't. And when Reagan campaigned for the office, he didn't let the bitterness of those sorts of things to infect him. You're right, it was morning or springtime in America, depending on which day of the week you might have caught him. And it still resonates with us. We still remember this, right? Because every Republican who runs for president now places himself in a position of relevance relative to Reagan. Right? That all the Republicans want to be Reagan's successor. And that really tells you something, because at the time, people thought he was nuts. And it's a little hard to understand how he's done so well over time. But when you think about something like the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the first George Bush tried to take credit for that, and everybody laughed at him. Everybody knew that wasn't his doing. That happened as a direct result of what Ronald Reagan did, and Reagan had a couple of friends that were helpful, right? You start thinking about that group of three, Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and John Paul II, and how they stood against communism, arm to arm, never wavering. And you think, well, who would do that today? Can you imagine Joe Biden and Pope Francis and whoever the hell is prime minister in England now? It's hard to, it's been just a little
They just
bit.
got a new one.
Yeah, that's all I know about that. But can you imagine three people standing together to dismantle something that had defined human misery for the last 50 years? And it's hard to see it.
And
really
it's
hard.
not just, I mean, you all probably think, my guess is you think of the Soviet Union in more fatalistic terms of, well, yeah, it was there and it fell apart and that's that. But to live it, the Soviet Union falling apart would be like the United States falling apart today, how you might think about that.
Yeah,
It's
well,
unthinkable.
When I was in first grade, so, long time ago, but when I was in first grade, they showed us how to get underneath our desks and cover our heads.
Right.
And apparently that would stop us from becoming vaporized when the nuclear weapons hit.
Right.
And when children are brought to that point, the level of fear that people had becomes quite unreasonable. And yet there it was. Every year they would show us how to hide under our desk. And, that when it's your entire childhood that looks like that, you have to contend, I think, that the role the Soviet Union played in world affairs probably more pronounced than people believe right now, right? It's easy to overlook it now that it's all fallen apart. Or has it, right? You look at Putin and all the things he's up to right now, and really it's a continuation play. It's not the same, but it is a continuation. And we don't have, I think, the political fortitude right now to deal with that right now.
Right.
I don't look at Joe Biden. I'm just not comforted by the thought that Joe Biden is busy at work.
And this is, I started off by saying that I was astounded to find that Reagan's average electoral vote count was second only to George Washington. And there's an interesting second parallel here. I've often thought, and depending on your background, you might attribute this to serendipity or you might attribute it to divine providence, but how interesting it is at the founding that we had so many of the right people in the right place at the right time. Jefferson, Adams, Washington, Franklin. How strange that they all came, and if you take away any one or two of them, you might not have the founding. It was those people at that point in history, at that place geographically, that made that work. And now we come to the 1980s and the subsequent fall in the late 1980s of the Soviet Union. And I think, again, you have this serendipity, or if you want to think of it as divine providence, of the right people at the right place and the right point in history. And that's those three that James mentioned, Reagan, Thatcher, and John Paul II. Each one of them, well, John Paul II didn't have to worry about politics as much as the other two, but the other two pretty much kicked politics in the teeth. And they said, there's a right thing to do here, and we're going to do it. That's not the sort of thing you would think about when you think about modern politicians.
It feels like it was so long ago, and it just wasn't. This is a drop in the bucket in time. It wasn't that long ago, and yet we have managed to forget what real leadership looks like. And not only that, because we've forgotten what it looks like, we failed to demand it, and instead we play this kind of sports-like game where there are two teams in the country, red and blue, and I'm going to be on one of them, and everybody else on the other side is stupid, wrong, and crazy.
Right.
And look, that doesn't hold water. That's idiotic, and yet that's how we go about our business. And if we continue to do it that way, there's nothing but harm at the end of the road. Right? We are only going to be diminished as a result. We really need to have a historical. We need to have a view of what appropriate leadership looks like, what we might expect. And it's far, far different than what we now expect.
Yeah, it's markedly different because today when we think about leadership, or at least when politicians think about leadership, their thinking is in terms of directing. They're going to tell us what to do that's going to fix the problem, which is markedly different than doing what Reagan did, which is pointing the way and saying, here's how you fix it. It's in your hands. I believe in you. Go do it. Instead, we get called deplorables if you disagree with whoever's in charge, and the other side uses other words to talk about those who disagree with them. And what has happened, oddly, and I guess predictably from an economic perspective, is that politicians today have learned the secret to getting elected. The secret to getting elected is to stand athwart half the country. If I can get that half of the country to fight with that half of the country, these people are going to be much more likely to elect me because they're mad. They're convinced they're right because I've told them they're right and these people over here are wrong. And what are they going to do? They're going to come out and vote for me because everything depends on me being elected. And my opponent over here, who may or may not actually disagree with me, what we do agree on is splitting the nation like that. And this, my opponent's going to do the exact opposite and convince these people that those people over there are evil or stupid or whatever it is, and everything rides on you coming out and voting to elect me. And notice what happens. The winner in that game is us, the politicians. So long as we can keep the voters fighting amongst each other, convincing them that half of them is other, indifferent, and stupid, we keep getting elected. That is the exact opposite of what Reagan did.
I say often that people get the government they deserve. And I think about this broadly, right? I'm not just thinking about the United States. I'm thinking about everywhere you find government, people generally get the government they deserve. And look at what we've got right now. It's awful, and we've got it coming. We deserve this. Why? Because we decided not to care about the things that mattered, instead caring about winning and losing. And as long as that's the case, you're never going to have the government you want. You're just going to have the government you deserve. Now, I'm not saying that winning and losing aren't important things. They absolutely are. But you really need to begin at the level of a single idea, right? What animates you politically? And in the United States, the correct answer to that question has always been equality. Jefferson gives us this in the Declaration of Independence. Is that sufficient? No, but it's enough to get started. And you have to look at that and you have to line up behind it. So what's the animating thought that we have today? I honestly have no idea. I know that we have a few, and Democrats and Republicans will have different ones, which means we're already at a point where nothing's going to work out all that well.
Yeah, and I think too often the animating thought is, what can I get out of the government? What's the government going to do for me, be it healthcare or education or jobs or what have you? Much less often do we look to ourselves.
Well, we don't forget paying off student loans.
No, paying off student loans,
That's a
right?
big deal, too.
Yeah, I think this crowd might like that.
Maybe not. I mean, look, when you look at government handouts, when those are the first thing that people think about, trust me, you've already lost this game.
Right, yeah.
You've got to change that. You've got to change that fast.
Yeah, and Reagan, was a fan of Milton Friedman's, and Milton Friedman is, one of the economists, and there are many of us now, who our mantra is the best thing the government can do is get out of the way. Set the rules, leave us alone. We're the ones that create jobs. We're the ones that reduce unemployment. All the politicians have to do is let us do our thing.
Right, so when you think about these sorts of things, what's the takeaway, right? What's that big thing that if you're too young to have lived through the Reagan years, what is it that you should know moving forward? And really, if I could water it all down to just one or a couple of things, you have to remember that he was an optimist. And he wasn't the regular kind of optimist.
He wasn't a Pollyannish.
No, but he was aggressively optimistic, right? It permeated his entire character. And there was something about that was exactly right given the job he held, right? I never get the sense, since he left, that presidents love the United States.
Right.
I just don't feel that, and maybe they do, maybe they don't, but it doesn't resonate. Nobody ever doubted Reagan on that count. You knew that the United States was, for him, the greatest country in the history of countries, right? And I like that. I think maybe we shouldn't dial it up as loud as we do from time to time. But if I had to choose between presidents loving the country or not loving the country, I'm going with loving every time. And yet they don't. And all they have to do is open a YouTube box and press play and watch the man speak every now and again. Because the lesson is right there for you. He never backed up. You can't find an example where that wasn't true. And what else did he do? He referred to the Soviet Union as an evil empire, which it absolutely was. What on earth could be more evil than that level of collectivization? And what else did he say? He said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And everybody thought, oh, here it comes. And then the wall came down. Who was right? He was right the whole time. Thank God. Thank God we had him. It was a blessing to have him. And if you could know anything, if you could remember anything, I think that's that short 3-item list. Whatever you're looking at right now, trust me, we've faced it before, and we did better.
That's a good place to stop, and we're going to open to Q&A.
Yeah, I think we had a mic out there for you.
Yes, there is.
Oh, there is. There is.
Again, just state your name, school, and a brief question.
Good afternoon. My name is Peter. I'm a student at Claremont McKenna College. Thank you both for being here. My question is about 2024. You talked about how presidents since Reagan, you wouldn't be comfortable with them being your neighbor. Are there any folks that you have your eye out on, or someone who perhaps more embodies some of those Reagan principles that you guys talked about? Thanks very much.
I just think it's too early, right? I think those guys are going to emerge, and we've got somebody from Florida that fits the bill a little bit, right? A year from now, I think we look at the scene, and we're going to have a pretty good idea of what it all looks like. But now, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, the people that are top of my list wouldn't run. I'll give you an example who, God, I pray that she would run, but she's not going to, is Condoleezza Rice.
Condoleezza Rice. We have this discussion a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if she ran, I don't think she would sweep the nation like Reagan did, but I think you would see remarkable difference compared to what we see now. She's not going to be a 51% win. She's a 60% win.
I think it would be hers for the taking if she wanted, and I'm a little afraid that she wants to be the commissioner of the NFL even more, which I think is great. I would want to be the commissioner of the NFL too. So who knows? Hopefully we see her or someone like her.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I should say, I did my graduate work at the Claremont Graduate School, well, now Claremont Graduate University, right on the same ground. Good to see you here.
My name is Luke Singleton. I'm a student at Stetson University. At Stetson, when we bring up Reagan, normally what we hear is Iran-Contra, or the idea that he was somehow responsible for the drug epidemic that swept the nation. How would you respond to professors or other students that bring this up as a black mark against Reagan that they claim tainted his entire legacy?
Look, I'm never going to make excuses for Iran-Contra. I think there were problems there. I think he deserved a lot of the black ink he got. The drug epidemic, on the other hand, that's just, I've never understood the complaint, nor have I understood how he was responsible for the AIDS epidemic, right? These are things that got trotted out pretty regularly, and yet nobody ever explained in any detail, step by step, why he was responsible for these things. It was very fashionable to just be anti-Reagan, and if you were that, you were never really expected or required to demonstrate the correctness of your argument. It was enough just to throw the mud and walk away. So I don't take any of those people seriously, right? I just can't find a way to take them seriously. Can you?
No, I agree. And I'm open to, I'd like to hear the argument.
Well, after all these years, you're probably not going to.
No, I'm not going to. But I think it's important as well. You were talking about the Iran-Contra thing. Look, we've got this weird predilection for requiring that certain people be perfect.
Yep.
Nobody's perfect. We're human beings. Reagan's not perfect. He made mistakes. There are things that he did that, I would say, I wouldn't have done that, would have done it differently. But if you're looking for perfection, then forget it. Everybody go home, because nobody's going to get elected.
And look, I'm happy to say that I'm not looking for perfection, nor should anyone look for perfection. I look for good intentions in a lot of ways. You hesitate to say that that's what really matters. But the content of a man's character does actually matter.
Yeah.
And and maybe this is a nice way to get into this. Every election cycle, I advise people to go and watch the debates between Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. Now, neither of these two guys is ever going to be on the top of the list of the most important presidents, right? You don't think great politician when I say Jimmy Carter or Gerald Ford. And yet, if you watch the debates, you will be shocked at what you see, because they were civil to each other, they were decent. They asked Gerald Ford a pointed question, and he said, you know, I might have done better on that. Who says that now? And if you watch what happened then, you see two probably third-rate national politicians being way, way better than the best of our crop now. And that difference, what happened from then to now, that's the tragedy of American politics. But that's our problem. Can we ever get back to a point where we might say something like, all right, Reagan, you really kind of screwed this one up. Maybe don't do that again, and let's see how it goes next week. Because that's what Ford and Carter were pointing at, and we've walked away from it. We now expect perfection, and as a result, what do we get? We get presidents and politicians more broadly who don't actually do anything. And that's the best option for them, because the gotcha moment never has to happen as long as you don't do anything.
It calls to mind one of his quotes I think is just excellent. Some reporter pressed him on an issue that he had changed his mind on something. The reporter's trying to get him into a corner and demonstrate he was flip-flopping. And Reagan admitted that, yes, he changed that he used to think X and now he thinks not X. And he said in defense, when I discover I'm wrong, I change my mind. What do you do? I thought, exactly. That's exactly right. We're not looking for perfection here. We're looking for someone who can iterate and get better over time.
That was right, but how many presidents have you heard say such a thing?
Yeah, zero. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shauna, and I attend the College of Lake County in Chicago, Illinois. So my question for you is, well, first I just want to say I really appreciate how you articulated Reagan and his presidency, especially since most of us didn't experience that, or we don't have firsthand experience as to what his presidency looked like compared to what we see on TV today. So my question for you is, how can we articulate that sense of unity that we need as Americans when we go back to our college campuses, amongst a growing body of students and faculty who hate us for our conservative views?
Right. That's a really good question. It's something that James and I have put forefront on our podcast. We make it a point, we describe ourselves as nonpartisan. I'd go a little bit harder than that. We make it a point to find points of agreement between the left and the right and to get people talking and say, look, we all agree, everybody agrees that people should be earning a living wage. Now, what's the best way to go about doing that? And we're going to disagree on what the best way to go about doing that is, and I got arguments as to why I think my way is better, but if you start not at the point of disagreement, that I believe in minimum wage and you don't, rather start at the point of agreement. We want to help people. People should have health insurance. They should be able to afford education. They should have a living wage. Once we agree there, we then have unity. Now, let's step forward, and we then have the ability to, how should I say, take each other seriously. I don't think that you're nefarious or vice versa, because we both know that we have the same goal and we embrace that goal.
Look, Ant's talking here about turning a moral question into a technical question, right?
Right.
Once we can find it in our hearts to say, my opponent isn't evil. That's really where you have to get. And once you get there, then it becomes a technical question. Now what's best? But the way you asked your question, I think, was informative, and I think you've got the right idea, even though I hate the idea. On a college campus, you are hated. And it's not that you're disliked. It's not that they disagree with you. You are absolutely hated.
Yeah, you're evil.
And when it comes at you from the other direction, the answer I'm going to give you is even more important, and it's so difficult. You have to just nod and grin when that comes in. You have to understand that that's the cost of doing business for you if you believe these things. And that you're here today, you do believe these things. So what has to happen? You have to go about your business without shouting at people. You can't direct your hatred right back at them. It's fine, I think, to hate them and to do that in the comfort of your own bedroom, right? But if you really want to get something done, you have to find another way. And I'll tell you that, Ant's right, we decided this early on in our podcast. And it's difficult not to call people terrible, terrible names when they do terrible things. And yet we don't. And what was it, 2 months ago, we got our millionth download. It's working, right? It's working. You can actually get somewhere with people if you don't impugn them straight off the bat. And they won't believe it at first. They will doubt your sincerity. But as long as they keep lobbing bombs at you and you keep not responding in kind, you've got something. So, I mean, it's a terrible answer. You have to subject yourself to their hatred. I'm very sorry.
Yeah, and I want to underline what James said. It's not a matter of walking away. It's a matter of continuing to engage. And I'll give you an example. We get tremendous amount of mail from people who read our articles or listen to the podcast or whatever it is. And, easily half of it is hate mail. And just the other day, last week, I had somebody write me, this was on Twitter, and the guy said in response to some video that I had posted, "You're an idiot," blah, blah, blah.
He's not
so,
wrong.
So here's the here's the technique that I advise, that I find that works. First off, you got to take a deep breath. Okay? Respond to the person, but read what the person wrote and take out all of the vitriol. And somewhere in there, the person said something that's worth responding to. Respond to that. Respond as if the person had written a perfectly reasonable and polite letter. And say, okay, yeah, and it helps as well if he said something right. You could say, yeah, I agree with this, and here's the following, do. What do you think about this? This is a technique I've used for going on 10 years now. 99% of the time, I'm not kidding you, 99% of the time, that person will write back, and it's as if I'm dealing with a completely different human being. The person is respectful, they're engaging. It's just somebody's got to take the first step. And that first step is you take that blow on the chin and you act as if it never happened. And all of a sudden now you're making connection.
And there's a lot you can do with it. I've seen Ant do this. It's above and beyond me. I don't do that. When I'm on Twitter, I like to think that it's fun time. I'm not going to yell at anybody, but we're going to keep it pretty lighthearted. But when you think about how people communicate with one another now, that's really part of the problem, right? We've gotten used to anonymous discussions, and when everybody is behind an avatar, they say things they wouldn't have said. I mean, I often respond back to people saying, "I'm pretty sure you would never say this to me if I was standing right in front of you. I'm a big, scary guy. Of course they wouldn't say that." And yet they do. People think that they can do these sorts of things. And that's what you've got to get them out of, right? You've got to get them out of this idea that they can treat people they disagree with like trash, to be taken out to the side. And that's really hard, and good luck to you, right? This is not great advice, I know, but it's as true as it's going to get.
Thank you for the question.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, thanks for talking with us today. My name's Caitlin and I go to the University of Florida. My question for you is, you talked a lot about how it's like red versus blue, or you're on the right or you're on the left, and there's no in between. Where do you think we went wrong?
Boy, that's a great question. God, that's a great question. So great that I'm going to punt it to Anthony just to give myself a minute to think about it.
Where did we go wrong? Okay. As an economist, when someone says to me something like, well, there's this product out here, whatever it is, and that product shouldn't exist, and it exists because corporations are evil, my response is no. Corporations, companies, give you what you want. If a company is producing a product that you might look at and say, look, this is wrong, this product shouldn't exist, the problem isn't the company. The problem is that there are people out there who want it. Companies simply respond to our desires. So too in the voting booth, the politicians respond to our desires. We have lousy politicians on both sides of the aisle because that's what we want. Those are the people we've chosen. The problem ultimately here is not the politicians, it's not the bureaucracy, the problem is us, the voters. We aren't taking our civic obligation seriously enough. So that when James talks about this debate, which again, I encourage you, go look on YouTube, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, presidential debate. Beautiful thing. Nobody's going to watch that today unless we push you to go watch it. Why? It's not entertaining. They're actually engaging civilly, deeply on issues. What's entertaining? It's when this guy over here catches the other one in a lie, or this one uses a bad word in reference to that one, or somebody said deplorable, or whatever it is. We start cheering because it's become, a slugfest. The problem is us. That's what we've asked for. And that's what the political body is now giving us.
Yeah, and you answered the what question, but not the when question that she asked. You ignored her question entirely.
I was dancing around, James,
Yeah.
giving you time to come up with something.
That's right. I came up with a little something here. We'll see how it goes. I was in New Hampshire when the Monica Lewinsky thing broke. Was it that? Was she the first one? It might have been a different woman, but I was there when the first one broke. And
Jennifer Flowers.
It might have been Jennifer Flowers. And we were walking in and out of campaign headquarters. And let's just say there were a lot of happy Democrats that day. And everybody in the Clinton headquarters, they knew that everything had been lost.
Happy Republicans.
No, they were happy Democrats.
Oh,
They were
I
all
see, I
running
see.
for the nomination of the
Right.
Democratic Party, and Bill Clinton just shot himself in the head. And Bill Clinton didn't shoot himself in the head. We overlooked it almost immediately. And if you asked me, as you did, to point to one episode when things actually changed fundamentally, I would say it was that day when a bunch of voters said, we don't care.
Character doesn't matter.
That's right. We don't care about that. Because nothing's been all that good ever since. Now, how confident am I that I've just grabbed the right thing out of thin air? 50-50. That might be very wrong. I don't think it's very wrong. I think it plays no matter what. If it's that prime mover, I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that a lot longer. But you've asked a great question, and I actually appreciate that. We're going to think about that quite a bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Matt Walker, and I attend Liberty University. So you talked about Reagan bringing the country together at a time when morals for our country were at an all-time low, and with this, he did this effortlessly and with not being divisive. What do we do about people who go under our banner of freedom, but are incredibly divisive and turn people away from our cause?
Yeah, that's a real good question. This is a problem on both the left and the right, and you can see it in the data. Today, more Americans are independent than either identify as Democrat or Republican, and that's not close. It's a big amount. I think it's like 40+%, 45% roughly are independent, and you got 23 and whatever the other number would be, 30 something on the other side. The plurality of Americans have given up on both parties, largely because of what you're describing, and it's a phenomenon on both the left and the right, at the fringes. Their goal, it's almost as if, I'm going to tread lightly here, it's almost as if both of those fringe groups are actually just interested in hatred. They're interested in divisiveness. The party they're affiliated with is just a tool that they're using to that end. And I think the best thing you can do is what we were having this conversation with the woman earlier. Turn the other direction. Ignore the fringe, turn to the center, and even the people who are on the opposite side of the aisle toward the center, and embrace them and say, look, we have a lot of commonality. Not only do we have a lot of commonality, it's 2/3 of us. We have a super majority who fundamentally agree and are tired with all of this divisiveness. Come together like that, rather than to continue doing what the politicians would love us to continue doing, which is fighting amongst each other. Because so long as we fight amongst each other, and you see this recently, every time inflation comes up, what do you hear politicians say? It's the fault of the rich. It's the fault of the gas prices. It's the fault of the war in Iraq. It's the fault of entrepreneurs. It's the fault of greedy corporations. They're getting us to fight amongst ourselves so that we never notice the real culprit. And the real culprit is them.
I think that's right, and I think it actually gives us an outstanding opportunity to reframe things as we might like to, because I really want to talk to everybody who's interested in freedom. If you think freedom is a good idea, let's maybe go get a beer, because I think we've got a lot in common. And if we have a lot in common and we could admit it to each other before we start yelling, fantastic, right? There was a movement back in the 60s called fusionism that you probably will come across in a reading or some background citation that tried to unite the conservatives and the libertarians in order that they might have a collective interest in freedom, and that interest might actually allow them to win, which in turn would allow them to make our lives more free. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't stop. They couldn't trust each other. And since 1964, let's just talk about after the Goldwater debacle, how much freer have you become? Yeah, not at all, right? Not at all. Maybe you've got to swallow something and get along with other people to the extent that that will allow you to achieve a broader goal, an aim that you should all have. And if you're against human freedom, I don't know what to tell you. What kind of monster must you be? But most everybody is willing to concede freedom to you. So let's take that. Let's go back to Reagan's broad tent, and let's see what we can do, because we never really tried. We
Awesome.
just never really tried. It's time to try.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is our last question.
I'm Patrick from the University of Buffalo. I was going to ask you about the infrastructure bill, but I'd rather ask you guys about the student debt cancellation. Most people that support student debt cancellation have a lot of loans or are in college, and then as soon as they pay off those loans, suddenly they no longer care about student debt cancellation. What's the logical argument we should show to people that this is, you're eventually not going to care about this, you only care about it because it immediately affects you? How do we get that away from people and make them realize that you need to care about things that don't immediately affect you?
The approach I take here is to point out what should be an obvious fact. A college education is either valuable or it isn't. If it is valuable, there's no need to subsidize it. If it's not valuable, we've got no business subsidizing it. Either way, there's no argument here for subsidizing the education.
People want money. That's what they want.
They do. And one of the things that, because the argument you'll get often is this is a good and just and moral thing to do. And I point out the fact that, look, student debt cancellation really, when all the dust settles, what you've ultimately done is to force people who didn't go to college to pay for those who did. That all of a sudden does not sound at all moral or just or right. But that's really what we're talking about.
And what we're really talking about are politicians buying votes.
Oh, absolutely, they're buying votes. It's illegal if you use your own money, but it's perfectly legal if you take money from somebody else.
This is a naked ploy. Right?
Yeah,
There's no confusion here. And let's just end with your common observation. Right? There are three things that might happen. But now you talk.
Oh, I'm sorry. The three things that might happen?
Right. We take money from some people to give to others. You remember.
I don't.
All right. Well, we'll just leave it at that then. That seems to be a perfect way to conclude with Ant having forgotten everything he said in the last 10 years. Thanks for coming. We really appreciate
Thank you.
you
And
guys.
if you if you're into podcasts, check us out. We're on all the podcast players, Words and Numbers, and we've written this excellent book that's available on Amazon, and there's an audio version on Audible, Cooperation and Coercion.
All the things. And we'll be hanging out here for a little while if you want to say hello.
Yeah.
Thanks for everything, guys.
Thank you.
Let's keep it going for Drs. Harrigan and Davies. Okay, y'all, we're gonna take a quick break. You guys can go back to your hotels. I recommend you get McConnell's. Make sure you're back in your seats by 6:25 tonight in professional attire with your name tags on. Matt Walker, that includes you.